have never dated somebody so kind. Like, this is my first relationship where I've ever been with somebody who's genuinely a nice person. He makes me genuinely happy. Like,
Megan Thee Stallion broke down in tears during a performance because Klay Thompson had been unfaithful to her.
It starts like a fairy tale, a message that comes exactly when you needed it. A first date that feels like the 10th. Someone who looks at you like you're the answer to a question you didn't even know you were asking. It feels like fate. It feels like finally. But for thousands of people, that overwhelming rush isn't the beginning of a love story. It's the opening move of something far more calculated. Psychologists call it love bombing, and it's one of the most effective manipulation tactics used by narcissists and abusers to gain control before their victim even realizes a relationship has begun. To understand how it works, let's follow one composite story, built from patterns seen again and again in real relationships, and see how each of the 9 signs quietly unfolded. Sign 1. She was put on a pedestal. He told her within the first week that she was different, that he'd never met anyone like her, that she was somehow flawless. It felt incredible to be adored like that. But real love sees your flaws and stays anyway. This wasn't that. The version of her he praised so relentlessly wasn't really her. It was a fantasy he'd built almost instantly, and fantasies are much easier to control than real, complicated people. Sign 2 arrived as intimacy moving at an impossible speed. Within a month, he was talking about moving in together. Within 2, he was mentioning marriage, casually, like it was already decided. It felt romantic in the moment, like he was simply certain about what he wanted. Looking back, she realized it skipped past the part of dating where 2 people actually learn each other, replacing real trust with manufactured urgency. Sign 3 showed up as compliments that didn't match the timeline. She was told she was the most beautiful, most brilliant, most perfect person he'd ever encountered after only a handful of dates. Flattery isn't inherently dangerous. But when it's constant, exaggerated, and wildly disproportionate to how long you've actually known each other, it stops being affection and starts being a tool, one designed to make you feel so good you stop asking questions. Sign 4 involved gifts that felt more like leverage than love. He surprised her with an expensive bracelet on their 3rd date, then a weekend trip she hadn't asked for a few weeks later. She was flattered until she noticed that every time she tried to set a boundary, he'd bring up how much he'd already given her. The gifts weren't generosity. They were the first threads of obligation, quietly stitching her into a debt she never agreed to owe. Sign 5 was communication that never stopped. Texts arriving every few minutes, calls late at night, and when she didn't respond right away, sulking or sharp comments would follow. This wasn't devotion. It was surveillance dressed up as passion. Healthy love allows space to breathe. This treated every unanswered message like a threat to be punished. Sign 6. Her boundaries were treated like betrayals. She mentioned wanting a quiet Saturday to see her sister, and suddenly she was met with hours of guilt, pointed questions about whether she even wanted this relationship. In a healthy dynamic, boundaries are respected. Here, they were treated as personal attacks, and slowly she learned it was easier to stop having them at all. Sign 7 was the uncanny mirroring of her entire identity. He started loving the same shows she did, sharing her exact opinions, wanting the same future she'd only mentioned once in passing. It felt like discovering a soulmate. In reality, someone that perfectly aligned with her, that quickly likely wasn't showing her who he was. He was showing her a reflection, assembled from details she'd given him, engineered to make walking away feel like walking away from herself. Sign 8 was family integration that moved just as fast as everything else. Within a few months, she was at his family's Sunday dinners every week, his parents already treating her like she'd always been there. It felt warm, like being welcomed into something real. But alongside it came isolation, gradual and barely noticeable. Plans with her own friends kept getting derailed. Visits to her own family always seemed to cause an argument beforehand. A year in, she realized she hadn't seen her closest friend in months, not because they'd fallen out, but because every attempt to make plans had somehow fallen apart. Isolation rarely arrives as a demand. It arrives as 1,000 small redirections, until the only voice left in her ear is his. And sign 9. Chemistry so intense it felt less like romance and more like addiction. A pull toward him that overrode her friend's warnings and even her own gut. That intensity can feel like proof a connection is special. But that same overwhelming feeling is often the manipulation itself, a deliberate flood of attention designed to mimic the rush of early infatuation so precisely that critical thinking simply switches off. The cracks eventually showed. As real pressures crept into daily life, the person who'd once seemed endlessly warm began to swing between affection and coldness, moods shifting without warning, small mistakes met with disproportionate anger. She held on longer than she should have, telling herself this was just a rough patch, that the person she fell for at the beginning was still in there somewhere. But the relationship ultimately ended the way many love-bombing relationships do, with a breach of trust. A betrayal that made it impossible to keep explaining away the patterns she'd been living inside for months. What makes love bombing so dangerous isn't any single one of these signs. It's the combination, arriving all at once in a wave calculated to overwhelm rather than build trust naturally. Real relationships take time. They involve seeing someone's bad days, disagreeing without punishment, maintaining friendships and independence outside the relationship, and being loved specifically because of who you are, not who someone has decided you should be. If you're recognizing pieces of your own relationship in this story, that recognition matters. The confusion, the whiplash between feeling adored and feeling controlled, the sense that you can't quite explain what's wrong even though something clearly is. These are common experiences among people who've lived through love bombing. Trust that instinct. Talk to someone you trust outside the relationship. And remember that love, real love, was never supposed to feel like a performance or a flood or a countdown to forever before you've even learned each other's middle names.